fall in their demand and their prosperity.
Well, hopefully oil producers are taking note of that. But Sanjeev Bajaj, let me ask you, so far the mood in industry has been that demand is holding up. Investments will be made. There is the start and the pickup as far as capex is concerned. And in light of the additional measures announced by the government, some additional relief has been provided. What's the sense that you get? Plans continue to be on track? Plans continue to roll out and move forward?
Shireen, as you said, the last couple of quarters, we've started seeing growth come back, at least consumer growth. Very clearly, we're seeing this on the ground. And as you mentioned again, quite a few sectors, not just commodities, but chemicals, look at real estate, housing, logistics. We are seeing investment already down that cycle. As CII, we did a survey with our top few hundred members a couple of months ago, and 50% of them were already in an investment cycle, and an additional 25% were going to make it in the next quarter or two. Now, maybe that gets delayed by another quarter or two because we know externalities have changed to some extent. But the good thing is that, in general, industry is over 70% on capacity, which means they're ready for the next investment cycle. And with a certain amount of certainty, inflation, I think, needs to be tackled. Now, we know that to the common man, in addition to fuel, we've talked about it, the other is food inflation. Hopefully, we are hearing it's going to be a good monsoon, which means food inflation should be behind us. We should see the domestic demand churning, and that should help in the coming quarters.
Mr. Goyal, if I can address the food issue, we just talked about fuel inflation, but if we can address the issue of food inflation as well in the short term, given the disruption that we're seeing on account of Russia and Ukraine, and most countries are resorting to taking measures, including what we have done. Do you believe that for now, what has been done is it, or do you believe that more needs to be done?
First of all, I would like to mention, for the benefit of those who are not fully aware of the wheat situation, India never, ever was a traditional player in the international wheat market. Until 2 years ago, we did not even export wheat from India. 2 years ago, we started with a modest 2 million tons of wheat export. Last year, we did about 7 million tons. Basically, this was a little surplus that we found available, and that got sold. Even within that, it was largely in the last 2 months after the war situation developed between Ukraine and Russia. This year around, we were expecting our production to grow by about 7 or 8%. Sadly, we had a very severe heat wave in most parts of North India. Wheat had to be harvested early, and we've lost production. Initial estimates are we'd be down 7-8%. By the time we get the final figures, it could be slightly more. Given that situation, what we are producing is about enough for our domestic consumption, with a slight surplus, a lot of which has already been exported. We'll continue to allow exports for governments which are in serious need, which are very friendly to us, where we have very great relations. We recognize the letter of credits, the genuine ones which have already been opened. Those will be allowed. So we'll be a player, we'll be doing to the best of our ability, we'll continue to export. As regards overall food inflation, it's still very much in manageable level. Rice has not seen any significant inflation. Wheat has seen some inflation, but it's not as yet very disturbing. Fruits, vegetables, for example, tomatoes, every year in this month, they go up. But they are not gone up as much as they went up last year, and now they started coming down. Onion and potatoes, which are two sensitive items, our production this year is expected to be good. Indications are all right. Prices are, in fact, on the lower end of the scale. So my own sense is that the packaged food industry, they may make a little buck or two extra because there are some people willing to pay for it. But at the lower end, the common man will not feel the pain of food inflation.
Mr. Puri, let's move away from the impact on account of the Russia-Ukraine war to talk about one of the other issues that is being discussed here in Davos, and that's what's happening with China and what's happening in China, and the move towards more protectionism, tighter regulations, and so on and so forth. And the opportunity that the realignments globally, as well as the supply chain de-risking strategy that companies and CEOs are at this point in time looking at, the opportunity that that presents for India. I mean, even at the last Davos, China +1 and what that could mean for India was spoken of. I just finished a conversation with the global CEO of EVA, and he said that as CEOs and companies start to make these decisions, they're either going to look at the home country advantage, or they're going to look at countries that geopolitically have friendly relationships with the countries that they're headquartered in. So he called it friend-shoring. We're very well aware of offshoring, but friend-shoring, is that going to dictate how supply chain realignment will take place? And how do you expect India to capitalize on that?
First of all, let me reinforce what Piyushji was saying earlier about challenges also offering opportunities. And I think what you see clearly in evidence is that many of these challenges have resulted in India seizing the opportunity. The healthcare sector is a case in point. The vaccine story is a case in point. I mean, vaccine production in the public sector had been dismantled between 2004 and 14. I'm not making a political point. We rose to the occasion, and 2 billion doses of vaccines administered to our people virtually gratis, free of cost. That's a very significant contribution to the global effort. I have a slightly longer-term perspective on what's happening in China or elsewhere. The current order that we are part of was set in the aftermath of the Second World War. The San Francisco Conference, where the United Nations came into being, the Bretton Woods institutions, the fund, the bank, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which became the WTO. I think what the pandemic demonstrated, unlike H1N1, SARS, Ebola earlier, SARS had a much higher mortality rate. But what this has demonstrated, as I think Piyushji was the first to remind me, this looks like the 1918 thing. That is when it started. I'm talking about March 2020, when we had our first discussion. But today, that global order has been challenged. The very fact that the United Nations system or anyone else have not been able to utilize their existing instruments to enforce a cessation of hostilities on the situation in one part of the world, I'm talking about China, Ukraine, Russia. What's happening inside China, I mean, the information out in the public domain indicates that there is a problem. I'm not going to make a comment. Does that have something to do with the efficacy of the vaccines they produce? There are other issues. You know, when the whole problem started, we realized what's happening. There was not just a disruption of supply chains, but some of us had to reinvent ourselves. And I think, as I heard some of my colleagues say, you are now re-establishing those relations amongst people who feel a certain sense of confidence and trust in one another, who are able to know this term you used just now.
Friend-shoring.
Yeah, fair enough. I think you store this thing in friendship and trust. I think that's it. No matter what happens, there are multiple crises that the world is confronting. The energy crisis is one we spoke about. That has an impact on the possible food inflation. Luckily, in India, we've insulated ourselves. We've taken a large number of measures to take care of our concerns. But these crises, individual crises, would reinforce each other. And in this process, you will look at a pre-COVID and a post-COVID period. I know it's very tempting, but sometimes misleading to do that. But the world which is now coming into being will be characterized with international avenues of cooperation very different from the Second World War I. And in that, I think India is playing a role. India will determine the Prime Minister's personal reach out. I'm not only just talking about Quad. I mean, he was in Europe recently. He was, so it's a very vigorous and sustained positioning of India to take charge and take advantage of those opportunities. What will happen to this? You will start contributing. I mean, I can give you a number of areas. Active pharmaceutical ingredients is one. How we went into the whole healthcare, the oxygen plants, etc. And I think that is what has helped. And yes, look, we wish well to all economies, large and small. But if something goes wrong in a very large economy, it has reverberations elsewhere. And we'll have to build in safeguards to make sure that the impact on us and for people that we care, we are sufficiently insulated against those disruptions.
Sanjeev, let me take that forward with you. In terms of what we are seeing, a change in the